else, because the ambassador is a public official from another government, we do have to call that a briefing, and then we'll have the actual hearing. It is a distinction without a difference. I want you to know that. So I want to welcome all of you today to this very important gathering, especially in light of the upcoming summit of NATO in Ankara. This is our second hearing, and I know my good friend Michael Rubin knows very well. We just had, and he was a very key witness on June 3rd, when we focused on human rights abuses being committed by Erdogan, and the fact that they have to be raised persistently, and hopefully effectively. He is really getting worse, not better. There's no, the glide slope is in the wrong direction. So I do want to welcome Evangelos Sava, who's the ambassador of the Republic of Cyprus to the United States and has been in that position since July of 2023. He previously served as ambassador of Cyprus to Finland with the parallel accreditations to Estonia. Before taking office in Washington, Ambassador Sava was political director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Cyprus, responsible for multilateral relations and security policy. Mr. Ambassador, welcome, and the floor is yours. And I yield to my good friend and colleague, Jim McGovern. We're co-chairs, of course.
You want to withhold opening statements until after the?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
all.
okay, welcome.
So, let me just get closer to the microphone. Honorable Chairman Smith and McGovern, distinguished members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to offer some remarks today in the hearing you have called on the human rights situation in the occupied areas of Cyprus by Turkey. I wish to commend you for this initiative, which also serves as a stark reminder of a 5 decades-long stain on the international system that emerged out of the horrors of World War II and on the rules-based order often invoked by world leaders, but regrettably, as the case of Cyprus so very aptly demonstrates, only selectively. What you will hear today from expert witnesses on the subject matter of this hearing will, I'm certain, both shock and horrify. On a wide range of human rights issues, the record is truly abysmal. Allow me to enumerate them very briefly. 1, the continued displacement of almost 1/3 of the whole population of Cyprus. 2, the unabated illegal usurpation of the property rights of these displaced persons. 3, the almost daily harassment and intimidation of the enclaved population in the occupied areas. 4, the unresolved fate of the remaining 746 missing persons, a purely humanitarian issue which to this day remains a raw wound for their families. 5, the continued desecration and looting of cultural sites, including of churches and cemeteries. 6, the active policy of illegal settlement of the occupied areas as a deliberate policy by Turkey aimed at changing the demographic and cultural landscape of the island. Testimonies will be presented today, analyze in depth these human rights abuses. On my part, what I would like to focus on is the political context, both in its national dimensions, and also in the overall international setting and its ramifications. It ought to be obvious in this regard, and it is without a doubt self-evident, that the gross violations of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Cypriots, regardless of ethnic or cultural or religious background, are the direct result of the 2 phases of the Turkish military invasion in July and August of 1974, and subsequent, ongoing to this day, occupation of more than 36% of the territory of the Republic of Cyprus. I need not remind that both the military invasion and the ongoing occupation made and continue to make a complete mockery of international law and of the Charter of the United Nations. Over the 52 years that have elapsed since the invasion, successive Turkish governments have, on the one hand, solidified the stifling control of Ankara over every single aspect of human endeavor in the area that their armed forces occupy, while on the other, they have refused staunchly to heed the repeated calls of the international community, its will expressed through numerous UN Security Council resolutions for a settlement of the Cyprus question, and here I quote, which must be based on a state of Cyprus with a single sovereignty, single international personality, single citizenship, with its independence and territorial integrity safeguarded, and comprising two politically equal communities as described in the relevant Security Council resolutions in a bi-communal and bi-zonal federation, and that such a settlement must exclude union in whole or in part with any other country or any form of partition or secession. Adding salt to injury, Turkey proceeded in 1993 with a further illegal provocation by promoting the secessionist policy of an intransigent Turkish Cypriot leadership, culminating with the illegal unilateral declaration of a separate entity they called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Indicative of the unequivocal and widespread rejection of this was the fact that the UN Security Council strongly condemned it, deploring its declaration, considering it legally invalid, calling for its withdrawal, and calling upon all states to respect the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity of the Republic of Cyprus and not to recognize any Cypriot state other than the Republic of Cyprus. Almost 43 years since then, not one state has gone against the call by the Security Council, which in and of itself is proof of the remarkable unity of the international community when it comes to the situation in Cyprus and what a settlement must look like. And yet, despite this very crystal clear position, Turkey refuses to budge from its dead-end policy of maintaining by military force the artificial division it brutally perpetrated in Cyprus, of continuing to advocate for recognition of the so-called tyranny, of denying the full enjoyment of all Cypriots' human rights, and absurdly, of not recognizing the Republic of Cyprus. I must here make special mention of the fact that successive United States administrations have remained committed over the years to the framework of the solution as laid out by the Security Council, and also to the policy of non-recognition of the illegal secessionist entity in the occupied areas of Cyprus. This steadfast principled position has been instrumental in properly addressing this long-standing issue, considering also the leading position of the United States globally, and of course, given its status as a permanent member of the Security Council. Honorable Chairman Smith and McGovern, distinguished members of the Commission, the NATO alliance will be gathering for a summit in Ankara in a few days with the President of Turkey, evidently eager and determined to make a show of his purported leadership. It is therefore more pertinent than ever to recall that in the preamble of the North Atlantic Treaty itself, it is stated, and I quote, "The parties to this treaty reaffirm their faith in the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and their desire to live in peace with all peoples and all governments. They are determined to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law." It is indisputable that the host of next week's NATO summit is in direct conflict with these very lofty ideals, which one would expect to be absolutely binding on all NATO countries, just as the Charter of the United Nations is binding itself on all its member states. I would like to conclude my remarks by underlining the fact that any and all human rights violations, wherever and whenever they may occur, are by definition a subversion of justice. A subversion of justice. The people of Cyprus have exhibited great perseverance in the face of this 52-year-long adversity, firm believers, evidently, in the maxim so eloquently articulated by Martin Luther King Jr., that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Until the tragic results of the Turkish invasion of 1974, until the continued occupation is overturned by settlement as prescribed by the Security Council, without foreign overlords, without troops or intervention rights, and in line with the rules-based international system and the values of the European Union, to which the whole of Cyprus belongs, until then, we will continue to strive towards that justice. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so very much for your very eloquent, persuasive, and timely testimony today. It does help this commission, named after the great Tom Lantos. You know, I just known parenthetically that I travel with Tom Lantos all over the world, particularly the Soviet Union. But on one trip, we went to Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and they were called the captive nations. We would not recognize as a country those borders, and I would respectfully submit that the captive nation, Cyprus, the part of Cyprus occupied illegally and brutally by Erdogan now and by Turkey for all these years, it's a captive nation. And we can't recognize it. We will stay firm. It's bipartisan. Mr. McGovern and I are joined absolutely in support of all that you are trying to do. And I note that Michael Rubin, in his testimony, talked about, this isn't just a status quo where things just are, the frozen conflict mentality. Anything but. There is a surge in settlement to try to displace. It's not unlike what the Dalai Lama has talked about in Tibet when he talks about the Han Chinese displacement strategy by Xi Jinping and his predecessors, and now we're seeing it by Erdogan. So like the captive nations of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, who thrive today in democracy and are great allies, we need to make sure that we never lose sight of that. And you might want to speak to the surge in settlement, but I would like to yield to my good friend and colleague as well, the co-chair of this commission.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank Co-Chair Smith for his leadership, his consistent leadership on this issue, and I want to associate myself with his remarks. Mr. Ambassador, I want to thank you for coming here to brief us, and I associate myself with your comments about striving to provide for the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Cypriots, regardless of ethnic or religious background. And as I'm going to say in my opening statement a little later, I refuse to accept that any dispute cannot be solved. As you said, U.S. administrations have been committed to the framework for a solution on a federation model as laid out in the UN Security Council resolutions. I hope our administration is supporting you in this effort. And in Cyprus, as elsewhere, we cannot reward aggression and should continue to refuse to recognize territory seized by force or coercion. And I'm glad that you said that Cyprus stands as a decades-long stain on the post-war international system and rules-based order that emerged out of the horrors of World War II, because that system, in my opinion, is worth protecting. But I worry it is under existential attack, including by some of my own government. The administration is withdrawn from dozens of international organizations, doesn't pay our UN dues, undermines the universality of human rights, and is squishy on NATO. So I believe America can best help the people of Cyprus by playing active and positive roles within the system rather than trashing it. And going aloneism isn't good for you or for your people, and it isn't good for our people. And lastly, I commend your government, a state party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, for its recent contribution to the Trust Fund for Victims. Your support to the cause of human rights is so needed. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping us updated. And again, I thank the co-chair for his leadership on this issue. I yield back.
Thank you so much. To react to your comments, first of all, about the illegal settlement, that's been a policy that Turkey has been following almost one day, literally, after the invasion in 1974. This was a deliberate policy. There have been waves of it over the years. We calculate the illegal settlers to be well over 250, 300,000 people who have colonized, if you permit the term, the occupied territory of the Republic of Cyprus. Let me remind that this is a crime of war. The illegal colonization of occupied territories is considered a crime of war. It is an issue that is at the heart of any negotiation seeking the elusive goal of reunifying my country peacefully, and hopefully we will get there. But let me also say that the colonization policy that Turkey has had in place over the years also affects, one would even say in a more direct manner on a daily basis, the Turkish Cypriots themselves. So their human rights are violated because they are forced in the territory that Turkey occupies to coexist with people who have been brought illegally, who have nothing in common with the Turkish Cypriots. And this is something that we feel and we see on a daily basis, and we hear from the Turkish Cypriot citizens of the Republic of Cyprus that it affects them in a very negative way. As regards your comments, I would like to say thank you so much. I appreciate tremendously the the bipartisan commitment. Both sides of the aisle have always been very correct in dealing with the problem of Cyprus and what needs to be done to reunify. We are also very firm believers, as you mentioned, to the international system that emerged out of World War II. The United Nations is indispensable. We need to work to make it better, not to get into any discussions about other options. That would be catastrophic. And as a small country, human rights and the respect of human rights is at the forefront of our policy. And indicative of this, let me also mention that Cyprus currently is, for the first time in its history, a member of the Human Rights Committee of the UN in Geneva, an achievement that we were very proud of to become members for the first time in 2024. And we will continue to be active worldwide, not just for the human rights of Cypriots, but for the policy of human rights and the need to respect them everywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Just if I could add with a question or two.
Yes.
Thank you for pointing out, as you put it, the truly disgraceful human rights record of the Turkish government and Erdogan in particular. The 6 points that you make are, I mean, thank you for that. That's right to the point. Maybe you could just give us some insight into the daily harassment and intimidation of the enclave population, as you point out. And secondly, what does that look like? And the 746 missing persons, you know, one of the things that is important in all conflicts, and this was an invasion, a brutal invasion by Turkey. And I remember working in the Balkans for so long. We were always working hard. I chaired the Helsinki Commission for decades. Mark was our chief of staff, and we were always looking to try to get to the missing persons. Even if they were buried, we want to find out where they were. If they're in mass graves, we want to find that out. Is there any progress being made on the missing 746?
Yep. So let me start by on the issue of the enclave, the truly humanitarian tragedy. In the aftermath of the invasion in 1974, 20,000 Greek Cypriots remained behind the artificial division line that was created by the military force. Now, on the basis of an agreement in 1975 between the two communities, it was agreed that the enclaved population of Greek Cypriots in the northern occupied part would continue to be able to live there with their rights guaranteed and no kind of any intervention by the occupation authorities to circumvent those rights or to make life untenable for them over there. Now, indicative of what happened over the last 52 years is that out of these 20,000 people, and granted there were a lot of people who were old at the time and they came to the end of their natural lives, shall we say, but out of the 20,000 people who were there in 1974, after the invasion, right now we are talking about a couple of hundred. That's the remaining enclaved population in the occupied part. What happens to them on a daily basis? For a long time, a lot of them have been unable to exercise their religious rights, being able to go to church. For a lot of them, over the years, they have been unable to exercise properly their property rights. So if they have a house or some land in their village, it would be illegally exploited, and they would have absolutely zero practical way of doing anything about it. Part of the usurpation of properties, the illegal usurpation of properties, that is such a big issue also in the context of the recourse that we have taken in the Council of Europe in the human rights, in the European Court of Human Rights, is the property issue. And their rights being violated on a daily basis, also the enclaved, is a big part of that discussion. So life is very difficult for them. It has been for a long time. We try very hard with the assistance of the United Nations peacekeeping force to make life as livable as possible on a daily basis, but it's a challenge, and it's a great credit to them that they have refused over the years to abandon their houses and their properties and their places where their families lived for centuries. As regards the issue of the missing, this is something very, very, very emotional. You're talking about a number of people whose fate has never been resolved. You are talking about families which for 52 years need closure, need to know what happened to their loved ones, need to know that this is what happened on that day, and finding conclusive proof that this is their brother, their father, their son, and this is how we have been able to ascertain exactly their fate. We are down to 746. The number used to be over 1,000, almost 1,700. Not a negligible number if you consider the overall population of Cyprus. We are now at this number, but there are two problems here. One being that the families are getting older, and they need to know themselves before the end of their natural lives what happened to their loved ones. And number two, we know for a fact that there are mass graves in the occupied areas, which Turkey, not the Turkish Cypriots, but Turkey itself as the country, has evidence and has information about these mass graves. In cases, we know that in some cases, these mass graves were included in military installations in the occupied territories so that nobody would have access to them, because only the Turkish military controls who gets in or who gets out. Every time we try through the relevant commission which is in place for this issue, the CMP, the Committee on the Missing Persons, Turkey refuses to cooperate. And it's really crucial to also mention that of the 746, we still have five persons who are American citizens. And in the case of at least one, we have strong information about where the remains are, and the family is actively lobbying here as well. We are also lobbying as well so that Turkey gives access to the areas where there is credible information, so that the Committee on the Missing Persons can go and do its job. This is a particular stain on Turkey, not allowing people to finally have closure on the fate of the loved ones. It's a humanitarian issue. It doesn't have anything to do with the negotiations to reunify. It doesn't have anything to do with politics, and it shouldn't. But there we are, to this day, having to grapple with the Turkish military being unwilling to provide evidence. And we understand why, in a sense, because part of the reason is because these constitute war crimes. These constitute war crimes. We're talking about concrete evidence of mass killings and then mass graves. So they want to avoid the responsibility, and we call always on our interlocutors, whether it's the administration or whether it's here in Congress, to don't forget this issue and to exercise any kind of leverage, any kind of influence they may have with Turkish authorities.
You know, there is a parallel with what Milosevic did with Srebrenica, and I was actually in Srebrenica with Haris Stalajic, the president, for a reinternment from the mass graves that had been killed in a genocide. Our next hearing, it might be advisable, we could do a hearing on that.
Yes.
And invite the Turkish ambassador to come. When I did a hearing on Armenia and the genocide, which they continue to say didn't happen, which is absolutely ridiculous. They need to be like Konrad Adenauer when he said, yes, there was a Holocaust, the Nazis did do horrible things. But this culture of denial is absurd and brings nothing but dishonor to Erdogan and the rest of the gang there in Ankara. So I think we'll do a hearing on the whole idea of these mass graves, these crimes against humanity. There is no statute of limitations on any of that. You know, delay is delay. We just need to refocus, and maybe you might be available for that hearing as well. But we will invite the ambassador.
We would be grateful if that materialized, and
We'll
I would
do it.
say that
We'll do it.
I would humbly encourage the Commission to invite families.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
To invite families to give testimony. I can tell you that at least one person that I mentioned before, the daughter of an American citizen who we know was executed. There is credible evidence that he was executed. This was a World War II veteran, a Marine, who, upon the Turkish military forces entering his village, put up the American flag on the porch of his house. But the Turkish troops did not pay any attention to it. His daughter is very eloquent and has been advocating for this issue for many years. And should the Commission decide to call a hearing on this, I would strongly encourage and inviting her as a
We'll do it.
witness.
Thank you. It's a great
Thank you.
idea to bring in the families.
Families.
Because when you meet the families, when I met the families in Srebrenica and in other mass grave areas throughout the world, but especially during the Balkan Wars, I was moved to tears. I couldn't believe how
Makes a world of difference to
horrible
hear
it
them.
was.
Yes.
And, but we'll do it. We'll do
Thank
it.
you.
And
Thank you,
we'll
Mr.
work out a time. And again, we'll invite the Turkish government to be here as well.
Thank you.
We are joined by Gus Bilirakis, who's a member of the commission and an outspoken advocate for all things related to Greece, Cyprus, just a wonderful, and religious freedom. So we are going to go to the actual hearing. This is the, as you know, this is the part with the
very good.
ambassador.
Okay.
If you have a question.
Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
I know.
It's always great to see you, Congressman.
Thank you. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'd like to now, the hearing will come to order of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission on human rights in Turkish-occupied Cyprus, Erdogan's record and its implications for the Ankara NATO summit. This hearing follows another which I chaired, joined by my good friend and colleague Jim McGovern. On June 3rd, can Turkey find its way back to freedom, authoritarian consolidation versus the defense of Turkish democracy? And we really heard from amazing witnesses, including Mr. Rubin, who is back, and I'm so glad he's back, who provided tremendous insights into the ongoing atrocities being committed by Erdogan. So thank you all for being here. I want to again thank the Ambassador, Sava, for being with us today, for his testimony. You are a true, just a wonderful example of what your government, we are deeply impressed on this commission with your work, your insights, and again, thank you for your testimony today. As leaders prepare to gather in Ankara for the NATO summit, it is appropriate, and I would respectfully suggest it is our duty that we examine not only Erdogan's words, but also his record. It has now been 23 years since Erdogan came to power in Turkey, first as prime minister and then as president. It is also appropriate that we talk about Cyprus, as we're doing today. During these 23 years, no territory neighboring Turkey has provided a clearer window into Erdogan's worldview, his ambitions, and his approach to power than Cyprus. The island of Cyprus is approximately home to 1.4 million people. The island is divided, as we all know, into the south, which is legally governed and administered by the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus and a northern zone where the Republic has legal sovereignty, but which is unable to govern as it is occupied by Turkey. This division originates in Turkey's 1974 invasion of the island and remains one of the longest-running unresolved conflicts in the world. Cyprus serves as an important object lesson as we assess Erdogan's intentions towards Greece, Armenia, Israel, Syria, Iraq, and even parts of the Balkans and Europe. What we see in his Cyprus policy is deeply, deeply disturbing. Much of what the world has treated Cyprus as, much of the world has treated as a frozen conflict. Erdogan has not. During his 23 years in power, he has systematically changed facts on the ground in ways that have made a negotiated settlement more difficult and have raised new human rights concerns. Erdogan has taken apart the post-1974 status quo piece by piece. Rather than preserving the status quo while negotiations continued, Erdogan has systematically dismantled it. One of the clearest examples is a demographic change. Successive Turkish governments encouraged settlement from mainland Turkey. But under Erdogan, that policy has accelerated dramatically. As Michael Rubin, as I said a moment ago, notes in his written testimony, quote, there has been a surge in settlement since Erdogan came to power. Many Turkish Cypriots themselves now fear that they are becoming a minority in their own community, with political, cultural, and economic decisions increasingly shaped in Ankara rather than in northern Cyprus. What began as an occupation has increasingly become a project of demographic transformation. Erdogan's policy have also placed growing pressure on the distinct identity of the Turkish Cypriot community. Turkish Cypriots have long been known for a comparatively secular and pluralistic political culture. Yet journalists, academics, trade unionists, civil society leaders, and elected officials have repeatedly warned that they face increasing political pressure, diminished autonomy, local autonomy, and efforts to reshape their society and culture according to the narrow nationalism of Ankara. This same pattern is evident in Erdogan's mistreatment of Greek Cypriot rights and heritage. International courts have repeatedly recognized violations involving property rights, missing persons, and other continuing consequences of the island's invasion. Churches, monasteries, and cemeteries and archaeological sites in the occupied north continue to suffer neglect, desecration, inappropriate conversion, or restricted access. These are not simply historic monuments. They are living expressions of a people's religious faith, identity, and historical memory. Perhaps nowhere has Erdogan's determination to create irreversible facts on the ground been more visible than in the abandoned Greek Cypriot city of Varosha in the Turkish occupied zone. Varosha was occupied by Turkey in 1974 when its Greek Cypriot residents were forced to flee. For decades, the city remained sealed off and untouched because the international community understood that its lawful inhabitants, now new settlers or developers, must one day return. The emptiness of the city symbolized the hope that a comprehensive settlement might someday permit its lawful inhabitants to return. Under Erdogan, however, Turkey has begun opening portions of the city to new inhabitants and encouraging development in total disregard of longstanding UN Security Council resolutions 550 and 789, calling for the area to be restricted only by its original and lawful, resettled, I should say, by its original and lawful residents. And Savos notes in his written testimony today, in total disregard of the repeated calls by the UN Security Council, Turkey proceeded to the reopening of a part of the fenced-off area of Varosha in an effort to prevent the prospect of its return to the lawful inhabitants, thus undermining the prospects for a peaceful settlement. Close quote. Erdogan has treated Varosha as yet another opportunity to create irreversible facts on the ground, replacing diplomacy with unilateral malign action. Nor has Erdogan limited himself to political and demographic change. Erdogan has also transformed occupied northern Cyprus from a territorial dispute into a forward operating platform for projecting Turkish military power across the eastern Mediterranean. The construction of a major drone base, followed by additional deployments of advanced military assets, demonstrates that Cyprus is no longer merely occupied territory. And that's bad enough. Under Erdogan, it has become an instrument of regional power projection, a potential threat to Greece, Syria, and Israel, and to the very NATO alliance of which Erdogan is a member and will be hosting in just a matter of days. This hearing is therefore not primarily about history, it's about policy. The Cyprus we see today is not simply the product of events in 1974, it is the product of 23 years of deliberate decisions by President Erdogan, decisions that have reshaped the island and weakened the prospects for reconciliation, undermine the rights of both Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and offer an important window on how Erdogan exercises power beyond Turkey's borders. As NATO leaders prepare to gather in Ankara, that record deserves careful scrutiny, and it ought to be on the minds of those people who attend. I'd like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Jim McGovern.
Well, thank you. Again, I want to thank Co-Chair Smith for his leadership on this. I'm honored to be here with my colleague from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis. I want to thank the ambassador for being here, the witnesses. You know, today we look at Cyprus, the human rights in the Turkish-occupied area in the north, and the role of the government of Turkey, also known as Turkiye. We continue our examination of Turkey's record on human rights and democracy. At the last hearing, we were told of the trend toward authoritarian consolidation, greater repression of political opposition and journalists, and further limits on the freedom of expression. This record comes into sharp focus as Turkey hosts the NATO summit in Ankara on July 7 and 8. President Trump is expected to attend. Yesterday, I sent a letter to the President conveying the recommendations of witnesses at the June 3rd hearing. It asks him to call for the release of prisoners of conscience, genuinely free and fair elections, and that Turkey abide by rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. And I hope he does it. I refuse to call any conflict intractable. I refuse to give in to defeatism. I believe any dispute, including Cyprus, can be solved with sufficient political will. The U.S., UN, EU, and Republic of Cyprus continue to support a framework for reunification as a bizonal, a bi-communal federation in which the communities would enjoy political equality per relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Talks haven't happened since 2017, and I ask our witnesses to update us on the possibility of returning to the table and whether the October 2025 election in the northern areas provides an opening. We look forward to hearing about human rights issues arising from the continued division of the island, the fate of missing people, the rights of displaced persons, freedom of religion and belief, cultural preservation, and accountability under international law. Greek Cypriots have raised objections to access restrictions on religious sites in the north and concerns over the desecration and repurposing of these sites and places of cultural heritage. According to the State Department's report on international religious freedom issued in 2024, U.S. diplomats encourage greater access. We do not have more recent information because Secretary Rubio did not submit an IRF report in 2025, and this failure is a concern of many of us on this commission. The report also mentioned restrictions on visitor access to mosques and the Republic of Cyprus. People on both sides of the island are entitled to have their human rights respected under international law. And today we will discuss UN frameworks that address the Cyprus issue. Witnesses will cite how Turkey is violating its obligation under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention by facilitating civilian settlement into territory it occupies. The United States should demand Turkey abide by its obligations, but will our voice have any credibility? For decades, the U.S. has turned a blind eye to Israel's violation of Article 49. In fact, the Trump administration has been legitimizing Israeli settlements in occupied territory. Double standards in our application of international law are self-defeating and undermine the causes we seek to support. We all want a durable solution for the people of Cyprus to live in peace, security, and dignity. That solution must involve the UN and be grounded in international law. And I'm very worried that this administration and this Congress are actively undermining international law. I mean, this week, the House will vote on an appropriations bill that provides no money for the UN Human Rights Office and almost every other agency. Republicans on the Rules Committee made an amendment to block all funding for the UN and rejected my amendment to prevent funds from being used to withdraw the U.S. from 3 UN human rights treaties, something that is under active consideration in this current State Department. I think that would be madness. I ask our witnesses, our audience, and my colleagues to consider what your advocacy would look like for Cyprus or any other place in the world if this administration succeeds in removing the United States from the international human rights system. Again, I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses. I thank Co-Chair Smith for his leadership on this issue, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now recognize Gus Bilirakis.
I have some questions too, Mr. Chairman, but I just, first of all, want to thank you for having this hearing. You always do the right thing, Mr. You're always on the right side. We appreciate it. This is not really a partisan hearing. I think we've never been more united as Republicans and Democrats on this particular issue. I wish there were other issues we could be united on, but this is so very important. It's a human rights issue. I have stories that I'd like to tell. One in particular, a friend of mine went over to, his mother had passed away in the United States. The father was passed years prior in the States, but they buried him obviously in his cemetery, his hometown cemetery in Cyprus. Went back to have a service, a Greek Orthodox service for his mother and bury his mother besides his father. And his father's grave was not there any longer. Tears my heart out. It really does. And this is not an isolated incident. So let me go ahead with my prepared remarks. But thank you to the witnesses. They're here because they love their country, their native homeland. They're not here for financial reasons. These people here, I know them personally, the people in the private sector, and they just care about their homeland. They're great Americans, but they never forgot their wonderful people and their country and their homeland. So I appreciate you being here. The personal stories matter so very much. So I want to thank again the Tom Landos Human Rights Commission, and I'm one of the members. And of course, Chris Smith and Mr. McGovern has been so good on these issues over the years. And my good friend here, we chair the Hellenic Israel Alliance together. And we're all together united to protect these wonderful allies of ours in the Eastern Mediterranean. The plight of Cyprus and the illegal occupation of a third of the country by Turkey is an issue very near and dear to my heart. I personally have family that fled for their lives during the Turkish occupation. As a matter of fact, I am going to Athens. I'm going to be in Greece next week on taking a congressional delegation to Greece. But I'm going to meet with my family, my Cypriot family in Athens, to have them share the personal stories with me. And I haven't had an opportunity to meet them in many, many years, but I want to spend some time with them because it gives me the ammunition I need to fight for freedom, unity, for this wonderful, wonderful nation of Cyprus. They lost everything, folks, everything. Very successful people, wonderful people, and they had a great name in their homeland. Now they can only look from afar at their home, which is gated off in what is known now as the ghost city of Varosha. So the first question is for, and I believe we can ask questions now, or? Okay, opening, and I'll ask questions. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. God bless each and every one of you for being here. We will succeed. We're never going to give up. Thank you.
I'll be brief. I want to get to our witnesses, but again, I'm going to echo, it's a privilege working with this commission, and I appreciate both our leaders for your work on this. And to my friend Gus Bilirakis, he mentioned the Congressional Hellenic Israel Alliance. We are partners on the Eastern Mediterranean Gateway Act, the Turkey Diplomatic Realignment Act, and most recently, a letter regarding Turkey's Blue Homeland Doctrine. I think we share, if not necessarily the same stories, the same commitment to finding a path forward and a path to peace. And Cyprus is a crucial ally in finding the path forward, focusing on justice is key. So I look forward to our conversation. I yield back.
Sorry, thank you. There are two members of the European Parliament, at least here, maybe more, but one is the Cyprus MEP, Gaiadis, thank you for being here, and also Nicholas Bay, who is the French MEP as well. Thank you for joining us at this hearing. Now to introduce our very distinguished witnesses, beginning first with Michael Rubin, who is Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum and the editor of the daily Middle East Forum Observer. He is the author of 6 books on international affairs, several dozen book chapters, and more than 3,000 published opinion essays and articles. He testified before the U.S. Congress more than 24 times, so we all really look forward to his words of wisdom, particularly on the Middle East. He, on our June 3rd hearing, provided very, very incisive testimony. We then will hear from my good friend, who is from my district. It's Savos Savikos. Savos has been a leader for decades on all of these issues. He was born in Cyprus. He immigrated to the United States in 1982. He has served as president of the Cyprus Federation of America, the supreme president of AHEPA, chairman of the Justice for Cyprus Committee, and currently serves on the AHEPA Board of Trustees and the International Coordinating Committee for Justice for Cyprus. And we have talked about this, and I thank him for, encouraging us to do this hearing. He again, for years, I have counted on his counsel and wisdom, and I'm looking forward to your testimony today, Savas. And then we'll hear from Sinan CD, I hope I got that right, who is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, where he's director of the Turkey program. Sinan has over 2 decades of research experience focused on Turkish domestic policies and foreign policy, with bylines in foreign policy, foreign affairs, Politico, Newsweek, The National Interest, and 1945. Sinan is the author of the Kamalazm, am I saying that right? In Turkish politics, the Republican People's Party, Secularism and Nationalism, which was published in 2009. So, Michael, I'd like to yield to you and then to our distinguished witnesses.
Thank you so much, Chairman Smith, Chairman McGovern, Executive Committee Member Bilirakis, and Representative Schneider. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Representative McGovern, in response to your opening lament with regard to U.S. policy currently with regard to the United Nations, what's not in my biography is that I'm on the Strategic Advisory Committee, a bipartisan committee for UNHCR. I recently came back from a fact-finding mission with them to the front lines in Ukraine, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and so forth, and I couldn't agree with you more. Perhaps at some point I can sidebar with your staff with regard to some ways forward with mitigating some of the issues that are now occurring and how we can separate the wheat from the chaff. Regardless, I'm here to talk about Cyprus. The question of Cyprus goes to the heart of both human rights and international law. Turkey claims justification for its invasion, but the facts show that Turkey's action not only to be a naked land grab, but a precedent-setting one. I should note that the common Turkish narrative is that they were rescuing Cyprus because of the actions of the Greek junta, because of the policy at the time of enosis unity, the irony here and where Turkey's analogy falls flat is the major land grab. 32% of the country, the ethnic cleansing, came not only after the junta had fallen from power and democracy had been restored, but during a period of peace talks in Geneva. There is absolutely no excuse, no reason. But the ultimate irony now is that the very historical justification which the Turks use could be more applied to them and President Erdogan's rhetoric regarding the forcible unification of the island, the lack of legitimacy of Cypriot sovereignty, and so forth. So when Turks make this historical analogy, it needs to be shut down immediately. When it comes to history, the truth isn't flexible in this case. The facts simply aren't on Turkey's side. And there's a tendency in the United States where we tend to have a shorter view of history, that we allow falsehoods, if they exist long enough, to sort of be laundered into reality in the public discussion. And the Turks need to be called out on this. If they're justifying the Turkish invasion, then by the same logic, it's time for the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to go. Had the US and Europe responded immediately and effectively to Turkey's seizure, ethnic cleansing, and colonization of Northern Cyprus, the Kremlin would be less likely to assume Russia could get away with the seizure of Ukraine, Donetsk, and Luhansk. The fact of the matter is, what's happened in Cyprus doesn't stay in Cyprus. And again, across administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and also, unfortunately, within the European Union itself, there's a tendency to assume that little countries can pay the price for unrelated diplomatic initiatives, or that justice and human rights for smaller countries is simply an irritant that should be ignored. But when we look at the precedent that we've seen with regard to the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, there's absolutely no difference between that and, for example, Transnistria in the north of Moldova, or Luhansk, Donetsk, or what the Russians have done ethnically cleansing Crimea. At any rate, I detail the history in my written testimony, but I want to focus here and my retaining time on the present. From a human rights perspective, this is not just Turkey versus Greece. And as Chairman Smith has said, Cypriot Muslims are traditionally more moderate than their Turkish counterparts. They have a different culture. By flooding Cyprus with settlers, Turkey is seeking to snuff out a culture. It is cultural genocide. Now, Representative McGovern, in his opening statement, asked about negotiations. The problem we have here now, when the majority of those living in the occupied zone are actually settlers, alien to the culture of Cypriot Muslims, is that the Turks are essentially stacking the deck to prevent meaningful negotiations. While I don't detail it as much in my written testimony, given the resources now that we know Cyprus has, especially offshore energy resources, and we've seen the East Med Act and so forth that was passed in the last administration with bipartisan support. The fact of the matter is, the Cypriot Muslims themselves in the occupied zone know and understand that if they were left to their own devices, they could have a much higher standard of living alongside their other Cypriot compatriots. The problem is that Turkey is now using this beachhead of settlers in order to stymie an agreement, because when push comes to shove, Turkey wants to seal Cyprus's resources. We should have no diplomatic nicety about what's going on. Time should not launder aggression. The lesson successive administrations imply is filibuster and the land becomes yours. That's not something we should accept in Cyprus. It's not something we should accept with regard to Russia in Crimea, and it's not something we should accept anywhere else. Now, Erdogan feels empowered enough to shred the status quo, and I think that this current administration and past administrations need to have some introspection about why he feels so empowered. We see this, for example, in Varosha, or more recently, in March, with deploying the F-16s to northern Cyprus, or the establishment of the drone base. And of course, I want to commend FDD for their work back in March, Sinan's work in particular, with regard to the deployment of the F-16s to Cyprus. That shredded the status quo. There's no military reason for it. But doing this was a way to basically stick the finger in the eye of the United States, to humiliate the United States in the view of the Turkish public. And the United States, whether Democrat or Republican, simply shouldn't stand for it. Erdogan's actions also belie this idea that Turkey wants aircraft to counter Russia. If Turkey is so concerned as a NATO ally that it needs these aircraft should be geared towards Russia. They shouldn't be in Somalia. They shouldn't be in occupied northern Cyprus. And the same thing is true, of course, with the drones in an occupied airfield. Selling Turkey advanced weaponry only encourages Erdogan to believe that there can be aggression without consequence. Selling advanced engines is further counterproductive because Turkey is now open about its desire to develop its own aircraft. Turkey seeks advanced engines not to supply its planes, but to reverse engineer American products so outside forces can no longer stymie or limit Turkish aggression. Back before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I believe in the year 2010 or 2011, I had warned about the Obama administration and its desire to provide drones at the time to Turkey, warning that there could be reverse engineering of those drones. We've seen what has happened, and the problem is not only the theft of American intellectual property, but Turkey has taken a destabilizing role in any number of countries. And once the United States allows that technology to leak, we lose our diplomatic leverage, and we actually encourage adversaries to undermine American interests, be it in Africa, be it in Asia, be it in Europe, or anywhere else. Now, it's not, providing military tech to Turkey is akin to providing it to China, period. Whether Turkey is a NATO ally or not is irrelevant. In fact, Turkey uses its NATO status in order to shirk its responsibility and its actions with regard to the theft of intellectual property. Now, Northern Cyprus has also become a money laundering and terror finance hub. Its casinos and universities fund terrorism and facilitate human trafficking. It proposes a clear and growing danger to the United States. Simply put, the United States should link Turkey's inclusion on the Financial Action Task Force blacklist with its behavior in Northern Cyprus. And while there can be complaints that Turkey is an ally, so how could we recommend it for FATF blacklisting? I believe, Chairman Smith, we've talked about this before with regard to human trafficking and other issues with the listing as Tier 2, Tier 3 countries for both Israel and South Korea, which you were very involved in. And you know what those two countries did? They worked with the United States behind the scenes to get off the list. When we have these diplomatic tools, and this is important for both Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, these diplomatic tools are most effective when they are approached objectively rather than subjectively. If we allow pet countries to have an excuse not to abide, then what we do is not only relieve pressure on one offender, but we allow every other country which is designated to suggest that their designation is just subjective and without meaning. We abandon our moral clarity. So what should U.S. policy now do? Between 1940 and 1942, the U.S. recognized Vichy France. It was a mistake that the United States should not repeat. The State Department should stop ascribing any legitimacy to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. And by this, I mean 2 points. The United States, whether it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, has instructed its diplomats not to refer to northern Cyprus as occupied for fear of upsetting Turkey. I'm sorry, it is occupied. The earth is round, the sky is blue. We call an occupied portion of a European Union member occupied period, and while we might be afraid that Turkey will have a temper tantrum, I point out, and through the good work of this committee, when it came to recognition of the Armenian genocide, not only by the Biden administration, but also all 50 states and the District of Columbia, so many people warned that Turkey would actually react negatively, undermine American interests, and so forth. And yet we see that Turkey is basically, and Erdogan is an empty suit in this. When push comes to shove, if we do what is right, he's not going to respond. And as a historian, the reason why it's so important to call a spade, to recognize a genocide as a genocide, is because if you don't delegitimize the ideology, it festers. Germany did the right thing after World War II. I spent a lot of time in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the reason why Eastern DRC is as unstable as it is, because the Hutu genocidaires who continue to fester in some of the camps in Eastern DRC have never had their ideology delegitimized. Now, this also means that there should be, in practice, no visas for so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus officials unless given on Republic of Cyprus passports. Now, we all know at the annual United Nations General Assembly senior meetings and so forth in September, when all the heads of state come, others come as well. Look, last year I met with Aydar Zubaydi, the president of southern Yemen, who of course wasn't recognized. And I've met with others there at these meetings. But when Aydar Zubaydi comes, he comes on a Yemeni passport. When the president of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus comes, why is the U.S. Embassy issuing him a visa on a Turkish passport? If he wants to get a Republic of Cyprus passport, he can. But that should be our policy across administrations. Likewise, why is there a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus office opened on K Street right now? And in many different European cities as well. I would go further. Choosing Northern Cyprus as a vacation destination is no different than choosing Russia-occupied Crimea. Anyone who fails that moral choice and funds a criminal regime, and I revert to the money laundering and so forth, the terror finance that goes on in the occupied zone, should be subject to extra review, if not visa bans, into the United States. I would say that, look, I know many Europeans, and I'm almost done, many Europeans who have visited Iran or Iraq for innocent reasons, and they have extra scrutiny, perhaps unfairly at times, when they come to the United States. I would take a much harder line for those who thought it was a good deal simply to fund an occupation regime because they want a beach vacation that's 100 euros cheaper. Finally, the United States should support the return of the Akrotiiri and Dhekelia sovereign base areas to Cypriot sovereignty. It's hard to advocate for the end to Turkish occupation when Britain retains its imperial footprint on the island. Now, there's a history here, and I recognize that, and I'm only talking about 3% of the island. In 1960, if the Cypriots wanted their independence, they had to acquiesce to this. But it's one thing when the British commit to defending Cypriot sovereignty. But we saw that in 1974 they didn't. And with Brexit, we also see that the British, forget this talk of from 1968, 1970, east of the Suez Canal. We're now talking about the British not projecting force east of Gibraltar or even east of Calais. And the fact of the matter is that there is no reason for the British to have that base there. I would argue with the Iranians proving that they can hit our base in Doha, for example, in Al Udeid in Qatar, that it's untenable for us to have a base in Qatar. We shouldn't take over the sovereignty from the British. We should lease the base fairly, return all those areas that don't have military value, and we can help better defend the Eastern Mediterranean and also put a line in the sand to Turkey so that they understand that aggression won't pay. The best diplomacy is bipartisan, rooted in moral clarity and respect for human rights, and backed when necessary by force. It's time to make ending Turkey's illegal occupation of Cyprus, and for that matter, portions of Syria and Iraq, core components of U.S. foreign policy. And with that, I thank the Commission.
Mr. Rubin, thank you so very much for your testimony and your very, very incisive remarks. Mr. Savas?
Thank you, Chairman Chris Smith, Chairman McGovern, Congressman, my good friend Gas Bilirakis, Congressman Schneider. Thank you for giving me the opportunity today to testify on the human rights situation in the Turkish-occupied part of Cyprus and its broader implications in the Eastern Mediterranean at the time when everything is so volatile. I've lived the invasion, my friends. As a 12-year-old, I witnessed the napalm bombs dropping all over the place, and we were running for our life, and we didn't know what the next day would bring. And unfortunately, that wasn't all. The next few days, they were even more frightening. Watching on TV and hearing eyewitnesses of what they went through, listening to women being raped by Turkish soldiers in front of their husbands, their fathers, their sons, and then witnessing their husbands, their fathers and sons being executed. And as Michael said earlier, most of the territory that was captured, it wasn't during the first few days of the invasion, but during a ceasefire, during negotiations in Geneva. And here we are, my friends, 52 years later, talking about human rights. What human rights? Turkey doesn't follow the law. Turkey doesn't believe in human rights. And all these international norms and agreements for Turkey is just fine print. Things got even worse under President Erdogan in Cyprus. Now Turkey has complete control, complete political, economic, demographic, and religious control over the occupied areas. Let me also point out that I grew up with Turkish Cypriots. We worked together, we played together, we never had a problem. Michael said it rightly. They were moderate, they were secular, they were not fanatics. In most areas where they lived, there were no mosques. If one visits the occupied areas today, there are more mosques built by Turkey than Turkish Cypriots. So there is a situation that it cannot be ignored. And I know we have the NATO summit coming up. And I know masterful Erdogan is going to try to leverage to show the world what a strategic partner Turkey is to the United States. That's baloney. And I'm terribly disappointed, to tell you the truth, and very alarmed of the statements made by our president last week. That is, he's going to go to Turkey with a big present, talking about rewarding the aggressor with F-35s and with jet engines. Those F-35s and jet engines are not going to go against Russia. After all, Erdogan is in bed with Putin. They have the S-400s. Those weapons will be used against the three strategic allies of the United States. They will be used against Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. You hear Erdogan and his cabinet members every day threatening Israel, threatening the sovereignty of Greece, threatening to capture all of Cyprus. And this is the real problem, honorable members of the Commission. This is the real problem why the issue is where it is today. Because administration after administration, we keep appeasing Turkey. And that is why they think they can get away with murder. Now, Cyprus is a proud member of the European Union. Today is the last day of Cyprus's presidency of the European Council. And yet, Turkey refuses to even acknowledge that the Republic of Cyprus exists. And they try to convince us that we should respect the realities on the ground. What are the realities on the ground according to Erdogan? 37% of the island being occupied for 52 years. And now they started pushing for a two-state solution. Mind you, Cyprus is a proud member of the European Union, and Turkey endeavors to become a member of that union. Please, let's remind Erdogan that when you want to join a club, you live by the rules of the club. There are privileges, but there are responsibilities. Michael spoke about the F-16s. F-16s, American-made weapons, prohibited by law. They are stationed in the occupied areas. What did they do a month ago? They tried to intercept and harass the planes carrying the ministers of defense of Greece, Holland, and Italy, I believe. Where is the outrage by our administration? Now we live at a time where everything in the occupied areas has been destroyed. Congressman Smith, my proud representative, knows very well. Over 500 churches, my friends, have been destroyed. Monasteries have been destroyed. If you were to be parachuted in the occupied areas today, you will never think that 3,500 years of history are extinct. Not even a name of a Greek village is identified. And you see, this is a pattern. This is a pattern. It's not something new. The ambassador spoke about the enclaved. Yes, there were 20,000 that refused to kneel, refused to surrender, and refused to leave. And there was an agreement in 1975 that they would be guaranteed basic human rights and the right to education. Well, if you believe that Turkey will live by an agreement, you're mistaken. First, they closed all the schools. Then they were not allowing any teachers to go into the occupied areas. There were a couple of schools, primary schools. And after the kids graduated and there was a need for secondary education, they had to leave and go into the free areas. But they were prohibited from going back. And that's why their families followed them one by one. And today we have less, somewhere between 200 and 300 living in the occupied areas, most of them elderly. So we're talking about human rights of the refugees. They left with the clothes they had on their back. Their property rights are gone. Their descendants' rights are gone. About 4 months ago, 3 elderly couples went to visit the houses they were born in. Well, they were arrested, okay, for trespassing. Mind you, to go visit your own home and be arrested. They spent 3 months in jail. This is what we're talking about. So as we come here to talk about human rights, we must remember that this is a trend. Because what's happening in Turkey, it's happening in the occupied areas. In Turkey, we have the Theological School of Halki that has been closed for over 50 years, basically refusing education to the Greek Orthodox clergy. You see the parallel? You have the symbol of Christianity converted to a mosque Hagia Sophia. It's like there are not enough mosques in Turkey. That is total disregard to basic human rights. And we come here to talk about the approach by the United States and the European Union. Yes, I believe that the United States is the only country that can exert real pressure on Turkey to withdraw its Turkish troops from Cyprus and sit down and find a solution, a European solution, without Turkish troops, without anachronistic security agreements, and yes, Michael, without English sovereign bases, because that was and continues to be the cause of the problem. The biggest problem these days, though, my friends, is the colonization. Over 300,000 settlers have come into Cyprus, they have brought by Turkey to change the demographic of the island. Now, the real Turkish Cypriots are about 80,000. 80,000. So they are a minority in their own, so to speak, country. They are considered second-class citizens. So it's not only about the rights of Greek refugees, but also the rights of Turkish Cypriots, the rights of Armenians, the rights of Maronites, the rights of Latins. So there is a greater effect here on many people. I think we have an opportunity with the new developments in the Eastern Mediterranean and the new relationship between the United States, Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. When the United States characterizes Israel, Greece, and Cyprus as strategic partners and pillars of stability, security, and peace in the Eastern Mediterranean, I'm very sorry, but we cannot use double standards. We cannot ignore the Turkish occupation in Cyprus. We cannot forget, and we avoid to call it as it is, invasion. But yet, we talk about the Russian invasion. Maybe it's very fashionable, maybe it's very popular, but it is the same thing. Russia used the same pretext, used the same script that was used in 1974 in Cyprus. Turkey is the only country, is the only NATO member that has not applied any sanctions on Russia. But yet, all the oligarchs, all the rich and famous, where are they? They are in Constantinople, also known as Istanbul. So there is an opportunity, and there are many, I will say, prospects coming up. There is a new effort, I think Congressman Schneider asked. There is a new effort by the Secretary General, as we speak, to bring the parties together, to see if it's possible to have a solution. We have come very, very close in the past, but the sticky points are the Turkish troops, the anachronistic security agreements, and the settlers. So if Europe decides to use the carrots, but also use the stick, the same thing with the United States, I think there are better days coming for Cyprus. After all, Cyprus right now is one of the most strategic places on earth. One of the most strategic places on earth. And especially with everything that is happening in the Middle East, across from Cyprus, the United States found a reliable, credible, and loyal ally in Cyprus. And it is to the best interest of the United States to push for a lasting solution. Unfortunately, my friends, the solution is not going to be just, but it better be viable and it better be functional. Otherwise, paralysis will follow, and then the dissolution of the Republic of Cyprus with catastrophic consequences. I thank you for your time. We will continue to push. Mr. Chairman, it is a mission of my life to do whatever I can to bring about the liberation of Cyprus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Savas. Cyprus and all of these issues has no better advocate than you. You have done this for decades. Your strength, your power, and your eloquence and your knowledge is just so helpful to this commission and to the Congress at large to hear and follow your wisdom. Brad, do you have to go?
Can I add something very quickly?
You have to go. Yes.
That just came up. The reopening of the theological school of Halki. Even President Trump put pressure on Erdogan, and he promised to look into it. As I said, it's the only theological school that belongs to the Patriarchate. Now there is a new effort by Erdogan, not only to give it back to the Patriarchate, so it operates as a theological school, educating the clergy, but it now tries to take it away and make it part of a Turkish institution. It's a detail that shows, again, the pattern of how Erdogan operates. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Sinan?
Chairman Smith, Chairman McGovern, and honourable members, thank you for the opportunity to testify on Turkey's policies towards Cyprus, the wider Eastern Mediterranean, and implications for the security and stability of the transatlantic alliance. As a political scientist and policy analyst, I have studied and taught modern Turkish politics since 2002 in Turkey, the United States, and the United Kingdom. I witnessed Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Justice and Development Party come to power in November 2002, and I have followed his trajectory ever since. From his earliest days in office, I have stood in opposition to his Islamist worldview, documented his disdain for democratic government, and chronicled his subjugation of the Turkish people to economic and political ruin. Turks today are measurably worse off under Erdogan than at any other point in the Republic of Turkey's history. My critique of his record has had consequences. The Turkish government has banned my social media accounts by court order, declared me a traitor, and branded me a member of the Islamist Fethullah Gülen cult, with which Erdogan was once an ally of. For my part, I am as proud a Turk as I am of being a British and American citizen. I was raised in a secular, progressive family. I am the son of an Air Force pilot and an award-winning, internationally renowned artist mother. That upbringing biases me to respect democratic government and to reject the autocratic, Islamist, kleptocratic regime that Erdogan has built in the last 23 years. I share all this for one simple reason. I am not anti-Turkey, but I am anti-Erdogan. My counsel is grounded in a desire to protect the national security interests of the United States and NATO and ultimately help bring Turkey return to democratic governance. There is a comfortable assumption, even among Turks, who dislike Erdogan's domestic rule, but say that his foreign policy makes Turkey stronger. I am here to argue the opposite. There is a difference between wanting one's country to be strong, secure, and enabling a malign government with revisionist ambitions that could ignite armed conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. Turkey now seeks re-entry into the F-35 program, from which it was removed in 2019 for buying the Russian S-400 missile defense system, and it also wants advanced US engines to now power its indigenous fifth-generation fighter, the Khan. Equipping Erdogan with these capabilities would be a grave mistake. Transferring these capabilities to Turkey is not the same as transferring them to other stalwart NATO allies such as Britain, Germany, or Poland, allies that have been committed to collective security. Erdogan's aim is to equip his military for revisionist purposes that would redraw the boundaries of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. NATO exists as a safeguard for the security of all its members. It is not an instrument for the autocrat's irredentist vision. Cyprus sits at the center of that vision, or Erdogan's vision. It is not a peripheral issue for him. It is the keystone of his bid to remake the region's maritime and defense map. Turkey has illegally occupied roughly 1/3 of the island since 1974. It maintains tens of thousands of troops, combat drones, and missiles in territory no state but Turkey recognizes. The United States and the European Union recognize the Republic of Cyprus as the island's sole legitimate government. Now, over the past year, Ankara has used the turmoil of the war against Iran as cover to escalate. This March, Turkey deployed 6 F-16 fighters to the occupied north, the first deployment of combat aircraft to that zone. Those F-16s were acquired through US foreign military sales and are subject to ITAR end-use agreements. Positioning them in occupied territory without consultation is precisely the conduct that warrants congressional oversight. This month, in June, Turkish F-16s harassed aircraft carrying the defense ministers of Greece, France, and the Netherlands as they flew into the Republic of Cyprus, prompting a European Commission investigation. Ankara sees an emerging bloc of Cyprus, Greece, France, and potentially Israel as a threat to disrupt rather than an opportunity and development to welcome. That is the posture of a revisionist power, not a status quo ally. Cyprus cannot be separated from Erdogan's wider ambitions. Regime officials in Turkey have advanced legislation right now codifying claims to as many as 152 islands and islets in the Aegean under the Blue Homeland Doctrine, designed to deny Greece, Cyprus, and Israel the ability to develop offshore energy, freedom of navigation, and also to fracture their partnerships. Against this backdrop, weigh the consequences of even considering giving Turkey F-35 fighter jets. Fourth-generation F-16s are already destabilizing the region. A stealth aircraft would transform it, penetrating contested airspace, undetected, and surveilling Allied vessels with near impunity. The danger is compounded by the S-400s. Operating the Russian system alongside the F-35 would let its radar collect data on the aircraft's stealth signature. Intelligence Moscow could and likely share with adversaries such as Iran, China, and North Korea. The S-400 remains on Turkish soil, and Turkey's reliance on Huawei for its 5G network deepens the counterintelligence risk. Placing the world's most advanced fighter, our crown jewel, the F-35, in such hands would not strengthen the NATO alliance. Now, at the NATO summit Turkey hosts next week, Erdogan will present himself as a strong Western ally and a bulwark against Vladimir Putin. That is a marketing campaign, not a statement of intent. His true priority is and has been strategic autonomy, independence from the West that is sufficient to pursue his own revisionist goals without further constraint. The evidence here is in plain sight. In the days before this hearing, the administration informed Congress it intends to proceed with more than $700 million in General Electric F-110 engines for the Khan fighter, overriding a hold placed by Representative Meeks, who objected that lawmakers were never properly briefed on the sale or on Turkey's continued possession of the S-400 system. That engine is the single most enabler of the Khan fighter, and Ankara is openly presenting the sale as a first step back towards the F-35. Two legal frameworks stand to prevent that and should remain in place. Qatar sanctions imposed after the S-400 purchase in 2019, and Section 1245 of the FY 2020 NDAA, which bars F-35 transfers until the S-400 and its personnel are removed. Ankara has offered no such commitment, no concession on the S-400s, no change in its sheltering of terrorist entities like Hamas, no reduction in its hostility towards Israel and other allied parties. But Erdogan's revisionism extends well beyond maritime boundaries. His government provides material support and political sanctuary to Hamas. Turkish officials, notably, have recently hosted and have continuously hosted Hamas leaders in Istanbul and Ankara, and that haven has fueled terror operations reaching all the way to the West Bank. Since October 7, Erdogan has intensified his advocacy, calling Hamas not a terrorist organization, but a liberation movement. He is the only leader of a NATO country to openly embrace and champion a terrorist entity such as Hamas. As recently as this March, Turkey's intelligence chief hosted Hamas's senior leadership, and US Treasury has repeatedly sanctioned Turkish entities for channeling funds to the group. Turkey also serves as a wider base to the Muslim Brotherhood network. It condemned US strikes on the Iranian regime. It has played a central role in transferring Iranian weapons to Sudan and runs the Sadat paramilitary network, the Turkish equivalent of Russia's Wagner Group. These behaviors have led analysts to ask whether Turkey is becoming the new Iran, a NATO member whose challenge to the West and its interests must be confronted, not wished away. This external conduct is the projection of Turkey's own domestic system that has abandoned democratic rule under Erdogan. A June European Union Parliament report just published has condemned authoritarian rule in Turkey, citing the erosion of judicial independence, the persecution of the opposition, including the arrest of Istanbul Mayor İmamoğlu, and the dismantling of press freedoms. A regime that silences its own citizens cannot be expected to honor the borders or democratic norms of its neighbors. The NATO-Ankara summit should not become a platform that launders Erdogan's record. The United States retains significant leverage, and Congress has both the tools and the responsibility to use them. Before closing, let me just offer a few recommendations. First, use the NATO summit to insist publicly that Turkey recognize the sovereign boundaries of Cyprus and Greece and cease harassment of all Allied aircraft and maritime vessels. Second, preserve CAATSA sanctions and Section 1245 F-35 restrictions. No advanced weaponry should go to Turkey while it retains S-400 missiles, sustains record Russian energy imports, and shelters terrorist entities such as Hamas. 3. Investigate whether Turkey's deployment of US origin F-16s to occupied Cyprus violate end-user agreements and condition future transfers on guarantees against basing in occupied territory. 4. Turkey's conduct in Cyprus affects the wider European and NATO security. The United States should coordinate with Greece, Cyprus, France, and Israel to deter further escalation. Michael's already mentioned the FATF restrictions. I won't touch that, but I'll mention one more, which I think is a crucial one. The executive branch should hold Ankara accountable for its sanctuary for Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood networks and scrutinize its roles in weapons transfers and paramilitary operations. Additionally, Congress can and should request an intelligence assessment of Hezbollah and other terror groups using northern Cyprus for weapon transfers and other material support. Recent reports indicate that weapons transfers have been made to terror groups using northern Cyprus as a conduit. Money transfers and other material support have also been reported. The Director of National Intelligence, in coordination with OFAC, should provide Congress with an assessment of the role of northern Cyprus is playing in smuggling for terrorism finance. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I would say Cyprus is the node where Erdogan's ambitions are clearly visible, where he tests Western resolve, militarizes contested space, and seeks to fracture the partnerships that anchor stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. The summit will showcase a Turkey that does not exist, a loyal Western ally devoted to common defense. The real Turkey is pursuing a strategic autonomy to advance revisionist goals that undermine American and Allied security, which is precisely why it courts Western technology while deepening its ties to Russia, China, and Hamas. We should approach Ankara with a clarity rather than wishful thinking. The gap between Erdogan's marketing and his conduct is wide, and the cost of failing to recognize it will be borne by the very allies whose security this alliance is meant to guarantee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much, Senan, for your testimony, your recommendations, the 7 recommendations, all of which need to be followed up on. And we will immediately get to the IRFA, USURF, I should say, to do a special report. I think that's an excellent idea. I just got a bill passed, my bill, to reauthorize the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. I know everybody over there, so it seems to me this is something they need to do immediately. They do report on Turkey, and they've raised many of these issues, but it needs to be more specific. And so your point is very well taken. And with regards to the F-35s, it seems to me very, very wrong of us to think we can proceed with that sale. I remember when the Shah of Iran left. Whose fighters were the new dictatorship in Iran using, Iraq, I mean. It was F-4 Phantoms and all the others that were part of the arsenal that we had conveyed to him. But here we have someone who, day in and day out, is committing gross human rights abuses, against a whole lot of people. We were talking earlier about the, Michael, about the whole idea of, with regards to Israel and South Korea. And I wrote the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. It's my law. It took 3 years to get passed. It was totally bipartisan, but it does not look away and say, oh, you're a tier 3 country, but we're not going to name you as such because you're an ally or a NATO partner or something like that. And we called out South Korea and said, you're at risk of losing all of your security aid unless you mitigate and hopefully end your complicity on the government side with human trafficking. And ditto for Israel, our great ally. And both countries went from tier 3 to tier 1 almost overnight by deeds. So I think your point is very well taken, that, you mentioned a couple of great points about the Financial Action Task Force blacklist, Michael. We ought to do that. You just follow human rights abuses wherever they go, regardless of who's committing them, NATO ally or not, and you call it out. And again, when you factor in the complicity of Erdogan with Russia, especially you compromising our technology. So your points, all of you, have been very well taken, and we will follow up on all this. I'm called for this hearing and the last one on June 3rd precisely because of the NATO summit that's coming up, trying to convey to the administration, please know who you're dealing with, and know how egregious his behavior has been. I did the same thing as chairman of the China Commission right before the meeting with the leader of China, Xi Jinping, and said, this guy's committing genocide against Muslims, again, Uyghurs, and of course all the other atrocities. I know you have to deal with them, but when you deal with these people, look them in the eye and say human rights have to come first. If you can't treat your own people, or in this case, people in Cyprus, with any kind of respect, don't think you are going to be selling you advanced weaponry, especially, right where you're sitting. Right where you're sitting. I had a hearing on the Armenian genocide, Sinan, and we had an ambassador from Greece. We had an ambassador from Turkey, and he threatened. I did 3 hearings on the Armenian genocide. Right from the podium, you like your base in Incirlik? Well, it may be gone if you recognize the genocide committed against the Armenians. I said, what a weak partner you are in NATO when you threaten our base because we're calling you out for something, a country, for those atrocities. Remember, it was Hitler who said, who remembers the Armenians? I mean, we do, and thankfully you do. And so I just think we need to toughen our resolve, which is why we're doing this hearing. Your recommendations and statements are we're going to get it right to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, your testimonies, in the hope that he and his staff will look at it. We should not be enabling a dictator. Years ago, I had a hearing on torture being committed by the Turkish government, and it is widespread and pervasive. I wrote the Torture Victims Relief Act, designed to help people suffering from PTSD. It is the law right now. And, the effects of torture are hideous, PTSD especially, but also the physical signs of torture. Well, in the Ankara papers, there was a big headline, State Department defends Turkey from our hearing and from me. It's like, we got to speak. Torture, there's nothing worse than torture and killing and maiming and raping. So we need to call out Erdogan. Again, it's bipartisan, and we're saying to the president, please, I know some of the press are following this, and I implore them to really get your testimonies. which are so outstanding. Front and center on the papers. AP is following this, as are others, so I do hope they will make this a very serious part of a report that they will write. And Ambassador, thank you for your testimony. Brad.
Thank you, and I'll thank the witnesses and welcome Ambassador Savas. Good to have you here. Obviously, an important issue. Mr. Svivikos, Saturday we celebrate 250 years since our independence. It's a really long time. And then I'm reminded, as you just, kind of glanced over the fact, Cyprus history, it's not 3,500 years, it's 10,000 years. But the long history and the fascinating history of Cyprus. And everyone talked about the strategic importance. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm reminded there are certain things that define strategic importance. Location is certainly a piece of that. Where you're located in the Eastern Mediterranean, it's closeness to Europe, its closeness to Africa, to the Middle East, obviously is critical. But it's also the resources. The natural resources we talked about, and Turkey has intentions towards, as well as the people resources, the connections. And the third element of strategic importance, and I think this is something we need to build on, and why when we talk about the transactional nature, and this gets to the President's conversations with Turkey, it's the relationship, and relationships across time, and Cyprus is a critical relationship for the United States and for our interest in the region far beyond just Cyprus. And the fourth key thing, I think, is reliability. And we can count on Cyprus and the relationship with Cyprus. And so from location to resources to relationships and ultimately reliability, the connection and commitment to Cyprus becomes, I think, obvious. Cyprus sits in a crucial region. It's a crucial ally that has pursued tough reforms from defense to banking to show that they are on the side of the United States, on the side of progress, on the side that rejects pessimism and sees a future for the region that is truly interconnected. It's one where we understand multiple peoples can belong to the same land, and that this acknowledgement can lead to the security, peace, and prosperity that allows them to escape what I call the gravity of history. What we know, and Mr. Sita, you made this very clear, Turkey offers the opposite. They see a future of conflict, of pessimism, of extremism, of intolerance. Turkey occupies more than a third of Cyprus, as they have since 1974. They host Hamas. They are constantly belligerent towards peace, including recently with their F-16s. They play games trying to have the F-35s as well as hold on to the Russian missile defense system. This is raw power politics. It's what we are supposed to be better than. Under President Erdogan, this pattern has intensified. You talked about President Erdogan's desire for autonomy. I would argue it's a desire for hegemony. Ankara has deepened its control over the north. It has treated Turkish Cypriot secular identity as an obstacle. It has used nationalism at home and coercion abroad as tools of policy. President Erdogan will host the NATO summit in Ankara next week, and I thank you for hosting these or calling these hearings. At the same time, his government is seeking major defense concessions from the United States, including the engines, the F-110 engines for the Khan fighter, and a path back to the F-35. Turkey was removed from the F-35 program specifically because of the S-400s that put American aircraft, American technology, and American forces at risk. That's not changed. Turkey's occupation of Cyprus has not ended. Blue homeland has not been repudiated. Hamas has still hosted the deployment of U.S. origin F-16s to occupied North Cyprus, still demands answers. Ambassador Barak and others in the administration may want a quick deal with Ankara before the summit. Congress has a different vision, a different view, and importantly, a different responsibility. We have to ask what American interests are served and what Americans are put at risk, what message we send when aggression is rewarded. The choice before us is straightforward, and I hope we make the right one. The Eastern Mediterranean can be a region of cooperation. It can be a strategic place, space, relationship, resource for the people across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. It offers energy links, ports, cables, pipelines, humanitarian corridors, and defense partnerships that American interests demand and we will all benefit from. I ask all my colleagues in this committee to push back on Turkey, and I believe that there is a better future for the region that is what's being offered. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Now recognize Ms. Titus.
Well, thank you very much for holding this hearing. It's especially important now that Turkey is going to be hosting this year's NATO summit. So we need to address these issues. And too often, members of our government turn a blind eye to the things that Cyprus has been doing for the last 50 years. Mr. Ambassador, always nice to see you. Thank you for joining us here on the Hill. You've heard a lot about this already, I know, but just to put it on the record one more time because I think it is important. This has been an illegal military occupation for 50 years. You know, you've got tens of thousands of Turkish troops that have remained on the island in violation of international law. They've divided a sovereign European democracy, and they have prevented a long and lasting settlement. This continued illegal occupation of Cyprus represents one of the longest-running unresolved conflicts in the world, and it remains a direct challenge to the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and rule of law that the United States claims to defend globally. Yet Turkey continues to disregard democratic norms and international obligations. But that doesn't just stop at Cyprus. It's acute there in Cyprus, but you can see it within the country of Turkey itself. Over the past decade, and especially since the failed coup that occurred in 2016, President Erdogan's government has accelerated a systematic and systemic assault on democratic institutions, civil society, and fundamental freedoms. Today, Freedom House classifies Turkey as not free. Millions of citizens have been investigated under sweeping anti-terror laws. Journalists, academics, lawyers, opposition politicians, just ordinary citizens have faced detention, prosecution, and imprisonment just for peaceful expression of disagreement with the regime. The scale of this crackdown is staggering. Tens of thousands have been arrested. More than 100,000 civil servants have been removed from their positions. Thousands of judges, prosecutors, and academics have been dismissed. Independent institutions that should serve as checks on executive power have instead become instruments of political control. Turkey's judiciary has repeatedly ignored binding rulings from the European Court of Human Rights. Civil society leader Osman Kavala has remained in prison despite international demands for his release. Turkish political leaders continue to be detained despite multiple rulings finding that imprisonment unlawful. And recently, authorities have just been targeting the Istanbul mayor and hundreds of opposition figures in what many observers see as just politically motivated effort to silence any kind of competition. Freedom of the press in Turkey has suffered a similar fate. Turkey now ranks among the worst countries in the world for press freedom. Journalists are routinely prosecuted, media outlets are fined and shut down, websites are blocked, and social media users face criminal investigations just for sharing their opinions online. The government has repeatedly restricted access to major digital platforms during moments of crisis, which limits the flow of information to the citizens when they need it most. These domestic abuses are accompanied by efforts to intimidate critics beyond Turkey's borders. Human rights organizations have documented campaigns of transnational repression targeting dissidents, journalists, educators, and activists in dozens of countries. So it's Cyprus, it's internal, and it's dozens of countries in the region. Even we've heard reports of harassment in the United States. But clearly the greatest example of human rights record is found in the illegal occupation of Cyprus. It has been occurring, as we've said, over 50 years. All the troops that are there, and there are serious concerns regarding property rights, religious freedom, and the rights of displaced persons. More than 160,000 Cypriots were forcibly displaced, during the 1974 invasion, and many families still remain unable to claim or freely enjoy their homes, lands, and places of worship. The European Court of Human Rights has repeatedly found Turkey responsible for continuing violations of rights of missing persons, displaced families, and property owners throughout occupied Cyprus. At the same time, religious and cultural heritage sites have suffered neglect, desecration, or alteration, underscoring the broader human cost of this occupation that has deprived generations of Cypriots of justice, accountability, and the ability to live in a reunified and sovereign country. Now, taken together, these developments clearly reveal more than just a troubling pattern. The same government that continues to occupy the territory of a neighboring democracy has increasingly curtailed the rights and freedoms of its own citizens. The same leadership that ignores international norms in Cyprus has shown growing disregard for judicial independence, freedom of expression, and political pluralism at home. The United States must remain clear-eyed about these realities. We should continue supporting efforts to achieve a comprehensive settlement in Cyprus that reunifies the island, ends the occupation, and respects the sovereignty of the Republic of Cyprus. We should continue speaking out against the arbitrary detentions, censorship, political prosecutions, and violations of human rights wherever they occur. And we should make clear that strong alliances are strengthened, not weakened, when we are honest about democratic backsliding and violations of international law, such as we are seeing. What we should not do, however, is reward bad behavior. With some of the things that Erdogan wants more than anything, we should not be giving him in response to this bad behavior. He wants these advanced jet engines, as Mr. Snyder said, for their own indigenous fighter program, and he wants to be readmitted into the F-35 program. Now, this week I'm introducing a joint resolution of disapproval to block the recent sale of F-110 engines to Turkey, and I'm leading a letter to House leadership urging them to block any attempt by the administration to readmit Turkey into the F-35 program, which would bypass the CAATSA sanctions. By rewarding Erdogan with arms sales that he wants so badly, we are perpetuating the horrific policies of a government that has flouted international law with respect to Cyprus, and we are allowing for the continuation of Turkish security policy that is defined by fomenting instability throughout the region, and we need only look at Greece and Israel to see examples of that. So I would ask you, let's see, how about Mr. City? Given Turkey's extensive acquisition of U.S. origin defense equipment, what concerns should Congress have regarding potential use of military equipment to prolong its illegal occupation of Cyprus?
Congressman Titus, thank you for your question, and thank you for your leadership in this area of concern. I followed your work, and my organization has followed your work for years now, and we're grateful for everything that you do to hold Erdogan accountable. Look, taking possession of the F-35 under any circumstance with Erdogan in power in Turkey is unconscionable. One of the things that I would outline that people may not be aware of in this country is if you turn on any Turkish television station or look at any broadsheet newspaper in the past few years, what you do see is continuous projections of a map of the Mediterranean and the Aegean Seas that is not a reality, but it is a reality projected to the Turks, which is this notion of blue homeland. And it's a maximalist interpretation of Turkish maritime and territorial waters, which is in direct violation of UNCLOS, the Convention of the Law of the Seas, which Turkey is not a signatory to, but it also expresses a maximalist interpretation of what Turks feel that they're entitled to. If the Turks are required under Erdogan with this kind of vision to appropriate the F-35, the fear is that they will use these advanced platforms to essentially make the blue homeland reality, not just a reality in Turkey, but a reality that the entire world and the region would have to put up with. We are looking at a potential Middle East conflict, an armed conflict between two NATO allies, Greece and Turkey, but also something that would draw in Cyprus too.
To that point, when do you think that NATO is going to be willing to do something about it with one of their own members? And, do you think that's possible?
You would think that this would have been yesterday. Look, I would say that there are very serious people in Ankara who are not fans of Erdogan. And when I mean serious people, these are people in Turkey's foreign ministry, in other government institutions. They have grown accustomed in the last 23 years to essentially believing that Erdogan represents the national interests of Turkey. This aggressive, this revisionist posture that Turkey has put forward under Erdogan has whitewashed and become sort of the modus operandi of even Turkey's most serious bureaucrats. NATO, unfortunately, is enamored with this notion that Turkey is a bulwark against Russia, against Iran. I cannot argue more forcefully against that because just in terms of demonstrated acts, whilst Turkey sings up platitudes saying we are helping to mediate the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, or we're trying to end the war in Iran, what you see behind the scenes is Turkey hosting, supporting terrorist organizations, most notably Hamas. You are seeing escalatory moves on the behalf of Turkey's government ministers saying that they will rule over Jerusalem once again. And these are completely overlooked as just mere jargonistic rhetoric. And this is where the danger becomes. NATO leaders, unfortunately, in Europe, because they lack a defense industrial base, because they lack munitions capabilities, and Erdogan has these in abundance, they think that they can essentially sort of use Erdogan. I think it's time to stand up to him. That time was yesterday.
Do you think the Secretary of State, when he goes to the meeting in Ankara, is going to bring up these kinds of issues? What's going to be the message that is going to be sent?
I hope he does. I would say that the Secretary of State is quite aware of what Turkey represents, the threat that Erdogan represents, because in the past, when he was prior to becoming the Secretary of State as a senator of Florida, he has introduced numerous hearings, legislation to hold Turkey accountable. I hope he brings it up. It's an opportunity for him. It's also an opportunity for the United States to hold Erdogan accountable.
I hope so too. Well, thank you.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to reiterate how important your role is during these very critical times, and especially in view of the upcoming NATO summit. The House and the Senate can play a very important role. Your initiatives, sponsoring resolutions or co-sponsoring legislation like the East Med Gateway Act and others, can put pressure on the administration and hopefully help them see the light. You can reward an aggressor like Erdogan. And when legislation becomes law, it has great effects all around. I remember in the mid-90s, and Chris is aware of it, the chairman, when we pushed for legislation to find out about the 5 missing Americans of Cypriot descent. That became law. And as a result of that legislation, we managed to find the remains of Andrew Kassabis of Detroit, Michigan. They found his remains, and they were eyewitnesses, see him with holding the American passport in his hands. And when they found his remains, Congressman Schneider, they found a single bullet on his head. So this is one of the most inhumane elements of the occupation. But right now, we need to alert the State Department, and especially Marco Rubio, who knows the issue inside and out. Inside and out. It couldn't be anybody better in that position. But I don't know if he's willing to stand up to Erdogan. In my private conversation with him a year ago, before he became Secretary of State, he was ready. But when you listen to the president, as I said earlier, rewarding or willing to reward Erdogan with F-35s and jet engines against the interest of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. And what did he say as an excuse? He says, you will appreciate this, Turkey was contemplating to get into the war on the side of Iran. This is what the president said. And supposedly the president convinced them not to. Well, give them more advanced weapons, so next time you will see them fighting the United States of America. Thank you for everything you do, really, Dina, Congressman Schneider, and of course my congressman, and the best chair.
Thank you, Safis. Thank you. Just, and I'll yield to Brad in 1 second for an additional question or two. But the, what need does Erdogan have to have such sophisticated weaponry? He has no natural enemy. If any, he's the enemy to a whole lot of other countries, or a, the predator, if you will. And you talked, Michael, about the reverse engineering on the drones. If we give our best technology, it's a superlative edge that gives us the military advantage everywhere in the world. If that gets compromised, we're in serious trouble everywhere. And I don't think, his relationship with Russia is very real. And of course, there's always China and other places that we are concerned about as well. So you and two of you had mentioned, Sinan, you had mentioned the idea of laundering. Laundering this, you said, Michael, time does not launder oppression. It doesn't. And I think we have to, one of the reasons for this hearing and the proximity of the meeting in Akron with NATO is to reassert, and as you said, Savas, Marco Rubio gets it completely. He and I co-chaired the China Commission for years, and I know him. He's great heart, very strong, smart. He's got to make sure that we are not enabling a dictatorship, and that's what Erdogan is. And what he continues to do in Cyprus is unconscionable. But time does not lead to, well, I guess we can move on. No, you can't move on. There are people still being seriously hurt. And again, what Erdogan did to the mayor of Istanbul, this is what Daniel Ortega and all these other people do. They arrest or kill their opposition for the presidency. That's how they handle it. They don't win at the ballot box. Or if they do, they cheat. So what is the threat that our government would say, oh yeah, Erdogan really needs these sophisticated aircraft and capabilities? It's all about projection, hegemony, projection of power.
Simply put, there is no threat. Now, just very quickly, there are two similarities between Russia and Turkey that most concern me in the context of the provision of weaponry. Number one, both Russia and Turkey embrace a revanchism and an irredentism that upsets the status quo, and they both assume that any revisions are going to work in their favor. What worries me even more is both dictators, Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, have single-handedly run their country's economies into the dirt. Now, here's the problem. Both countries, people, are very nationalistic, and many often live in a media bubble, a mythology bubble, that is detached from reality. There's a dynamic in play with regard to Russia, for example, in terms of its revanchism, where in 2008, for example, it invaded Georgia. And it was a good nationalist distraction. But once you occupy Abkhazia and South Ossetia, you have to spend money in order to subsidize that occupation. So it speeds up the dynamic. And then, of course, in 2014, we saw the first invasion of Ukraine, the occupation of Crimea. I just came back 2 weeks ago from Donetsk, from the border of Donetsk, some of the oblast, as well as Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, and Kharkiv. And when you see what started as a distraction turned into an economic boondoggle, if there's any settlement in Ukraine, you can bet that the next step would be for Vladimir Putin to distract people, his own people, by going into the Baltics. Now, the problem when we come to Turkey is as inflation remains out of control, as Turkey, which once aspired to be one of the top 10 industrial nations, has trouble staying in the top 30, there's a chance that that weaponry is going to be used against Libya, against, in favor of Hamas against Israel. I just came back from Lebanon earlier this week. People are almost as afraid of Turkey as they are of Iran. The fact of the matter is, Turkey needs a nationalist distraction in order to shield the people, shield Erdogan from accountability, and shield Erdogan from having to face the wrath of his own people for taking what should have been a wealthy nation and driving it into the ground. Make no mistake, the biggest problem in the region is Erdogan himself, and arming a bully, arming a man who is desperate, is only going to exacerbate some of the security problems down the line. You never want to arm an ally who sees U.S. designated terrorist groups as allies.
I need to leave for a very important meeting in the Capitol. No, Brad's going to take over. I can't thank you enough for your testimony. We will get it all to Marco Rubio, his staff, and others at the White House. And so thank you for your incredible testimony and for bearing witness to a very ugly truth, and that is Erdogan. Thank you. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, and I actually just have one more question, and I'll wrap up. But let me say thank you to all of the witnesses for your insights and perspectives, and a critically important issue. Dr. Rubin, I'm going to read from your statement. You said it in your remarks as well. U.S. State Department does U.S. policy no favor when it continues a policy to avoid deeming Northern Cyprus occupied. And what I would ask you is, what are the implications of refusing to recognize the occupation, of not standing up to Turkey and calling an occupation out for what it actually is?
I mean, thank you for your question, Representative Schneider. And basically, if we refuse to call the occupation an occupation, we are convincing Turkey that its aggression comes at zero cost. We are also betraying the European Union, whose member is currently being occupied. It does absolutely no U.S. policy goal to obfuscate in this situation.
Great. Thank you, and I concur completely. Let me take this moment again to say thank you to the three of you for what was truly, I think, a remarkable and worthwhile conversation and hearing. I want to thank both Chairman Smith and Mr. McGovern for their leadership. Proud to be here and look forward to continuing our work together. And I guess with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.